protective polyurethane and paint coatings until you've reached the bare shaft. Be careful not to oversand by removing too much graphite material from the shaft tip, as this is going to weaken the shaft tip and potentially cause breakage at a later date. If you're a frequent listener to our webinars, I hope I don't sound like a broken record here, but manufacturers will not warrant shafts that break as a result of oversanding. Now, there's a few things I'd like to discuss before I go any further. And the first is tolerances in tip diameters. When you sand the tip of a shaft, it's going to become smaller. But there's going to be some cases, even after sanding the tip of the shaft, it will still not fit inside the hosel. One thing, don't sand any more than down to the bare shaft. In those cases, you want to enlarge the bore of the hosel. This is actually considered a normal club making procedure and may be required from time to time. Yes, it could be a pain in the you-know-what because it's going to require some additional work, but failure to do so can lead to breakage at the tip and not to mention potentially scarring your reputation as a competent club maker if this occurs on a regular basis. Now, if you happen to use light-colored shafts like white and yellow, these may very well have several layers of paint on them so that the black doesn't bleed through. A good example was the yellow-colored UST Pro 4 shafts. It was hard to test fit those shafts into the hosels because they had multiple layers of paint on them. And when you sand it through, it would take a while because you went through, I believe, like 3 layers of paint until you got down to the dull charcoal color, just like the butt end of the graphite shaft. That's what you're trying to strive or look for. Now, two-tone shafts may have an extra base layer of paint at the tip, so don't be surprised if it requires more time as well. Plus, don't confuse a layer of black paint for the shaft. Again, the bare shaft is actually charcoal in color. Now, do you have to get all the paint off? Well, the answer to that is no. What you want is that the paint and polyurethane is roughened enough to eliminate a smooth surface. It may require you to remove all the paint to get the shaft into the hosel, but leaving a little on there, as long as it's rough enough sufficiently and the shaft enters the hosel, that's all that's really necessary. Okay, we'll turn the page here. Okay, our next slide is hand filing, and this is another manual procedure that's been used successfully by club makers over the years. However, hand filing is used to abrade the tip of steel and other metallic shafts like titanium or aluminum, which you don't see very often unless you're doing repair. Now, filing is considered the least effective of all the hand methods because with chrome-plated steel shafts, it's very difficult to abrade the entire shaft tip area uniformly. And remember to constantly rotate the shaft in the vise clamp and periodically check your work to ensure that you get an even degree of roughness around the shaft. And with graphite shafts, you run the risk of filing a notch or a groove into the shaft that could eventually lead to the shaft fracturing. Therefore, we never recommend hand filing a graphite shaft. The best method by far for achieving a professional quality shaft tip abrasion is the use of a belt sander. The most popular belt sanders used by club makers are the little 1x30 inch belt sander or the bigger 1x42 inch. But before you go out and purchase one, if you don't already have one, there's something you'll want to know or need to know about them. The 1x30 inch machines are cheap and they're readily available. If all you're going to work on is steel shafts, these work perfectly fine. But for graphite shafts, you have to be very careful about the belts, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. For steel shafts, you want to use either 80 grit, which is preferred, or even 120 grit medium grit sanding or a belt. In this case, the medium grit is acceptable because the speed of the belt is rotating. Either way, the club maker can abrade steel shaft tips to the proper degree of roughness and do so much faster than any other method. And to avoid notching or cutting a potential damaging groove into the shaft, the tip abrasion should always be performed on the flexible portion of the belt where there's no metal backing, which is known as the platen, or that little bar behind the belt as you see from the photo on this slide. Let me move my little mouse here and you can see it. Not here at the base, but up here near the flexible portion, and it'll give. Okay. All you have to do is spin the shaft in the opposite direction that the belt is going using medium pressure. And to abrade a steel shaft is only going to take seconds to do. The only thing you ever have to worry about is taking too much material off the real super lightweight steel shafts. In those cases, just use lighter pressure to abrade the shaft. And it's going to be visible that the steel shaft tip is roughened enough when it appears dull, and you can actually see scratch marks from the grit of the sandpaper. Okay, now let's talk about graphite shafts, which can be abraded safely using a belt sander, but only with the use of a special graphite tip abrading belt. These belts are made of synthetic materials such as Scotch-Brite that strip away the paint polyurethane quickly and is less likely to remove too much of the actual graphite portion of the shaft tip. Just be careful not to over-abrade by aggressively pushing the shaft against the belt. This can cause premature breakage. Sandpaper belts are never, and I mean never, recommended for graphite or composite tip abrasion for this very reason. Now this is the part I was going to follow up about using the